Hey, Nick.
Hi, Vladi.
Hey.
Yeah, can you please use my full name?
That's what I'm doing. How are you doing? You seem
It's
to be
so
in a good
funny.
mood today.
It's so funny the number of people who know that I like my name, but for some reason they find it complicated or long. So they abbreviate it behind my back, and sometimes it comes through. So yeah.
People do that, like they call you behind your back with your nick and in
Well,
front of you. I mean, I don't call you with your nickname in your behind your back. I call you in front of you.
yeah, but
So at
it's not
least
my
I have
nickname.
that, spine to do it with you and in front of you.
I've learned to respond to neck, but it still feels a bit weird.
Mm.
But I'm fine. I'm in a good mood, and it's yes. This time yesterday, I was tired. Um, I was going through this. Why am I doing this to myself? Type phase because I had so many meetings and some of them quite difficult. Because we started our first fundraising conversation for my other business. But today I'm in a good mood. It's Friday. Last night we went to see a musical, which was the first time being in a
Oh
big,
yeah.
spectacular
Lovely.
theater for the first time in since pre-pandemic, which was an experience that was very energizing. Just
Mm.
hearing people sing, being close to the voices, and feeling the energy of somebody singing a few meters away from you was pretty
Mm-hmm.
amazing.
Nobody coughing in front of you?
No, not like when we went to the
Not this
opera. No,
time.
no, that was terrible.
Really?
This was good. But
Yeah.
also this was there everybody's vaccination was checked as we entered, and people were strongly encouraged to wear masks, which was very different from when we went to this one show before that I was so annoyed by.
Nobody wears masks here in Pakistan. So we arrived, what is it now? 2 days. Again, it feels like a year already. I've been here, but 2 days. And yeah, this was one of the things that sort of, I immediately observed. I was like, oh, where are the masks? Um, so just on that note, but I can relate to you on what you were saying around the yesterday and the little bit of the ups and downs. And especially, I think we're finding ourselves in the similar experiences right now because you are fundraising and we are fundraising here in Pakistan. And it's a very specific type of experience, which, has its own emotional roller coaster. Certainly from my side, a lot of learning, but yeah, so I hear you on
You are
on
further down the track.
yeah, well, you could say so. I mean, that's the thing, right? Okay, I'm not sure if this is but it's coming up, the episode about, let's unpack it, but just for a while. But so one could think that we are further ahead. We've been fundraising now for about, I think, frankly speaking, it's becoming about 2 months, if not more, with the prep and everything. And for me, the roller coaster, the biggest sort of fluctuation emotionally is when we are now feeling that tomorrow we can close the whole race and we are not raising a huge amount, but actually we also experience it already in this term of raising, is that we already thought so, and then one of the investors just flipped out as nothing, and he said if it's from quick yes to quick no for all kinds of reasons. And that's something you have to learn to deal with, and that's certainly has been new for me because this is my first real fundraise for our own business. So when you say that, like, we are further ahead, we are, but I feel like, you know what, nothing is guaranteed. Like, till I have things confirmed in the writing with the signatures and terms, I'm like, I'm not allowing myself to fully open up and relieve. I'm like, heads down. And it's a little bit of that rabbit or whatever animal we say. It's not rabbit, it's the other animal that is, the small mouse. Škrečak, we say in Slovak.
Hamster?
Hamster, yes. So you see, you can learn a Slovak word. So you are running like a hamster in a wheel a little bit, but to me, I think it's a coping mechanism as well, to be less impacted by a lot of no's or a lot of maybes and be like, that's fine. And last point I want to make to this is what also helps me or has helped me is to talk to other founders. We have talked, but I've talked to many other people who have been fundraising, and one of them told me, it's a Slovak founder out of Silicon Valley, and he just raised 53 million. And he told me, I have a CRM, like my database of over 500 VCs. I literally had that amount of conversation, and I was like, okay, good. Like, you know, like it doesn't mean that the 3 friends we have will invest. Like, you have to do the proper work. So yeah, the conversation with others certainly do help to sanitize.
Our experience is a little bit, when I say you're further in the journey, you've actually been asking for money. So we've been asking for feedback. So we are at the point where people are still tearing us apart. So although we're certain that our proposition is solid, sometimes just practically going out there and saying, this is what we're building. And people going, what? We don't get it. And you go, we've spent so much time working on this, so at explaining it really well. So why is it that you don't get it? That they're going back to the drawing board? And it is that when people talk about the entrepreneurial roller coaster, right? It's building the product, which is a roller coaster in itself, and then building the story, which is a roller coaster in itself, and then it's the raising the money, which is a roller coaster in itself. And for me, the fundraising in particular feels a little bit like dating. When you go on all these dates and people say, I'm not interested in you, and you try really hard to say, you know what, this is a reflection on you, it's not a reflection on me, which is what a date ultimately is somebody may not be ready. But then there's the ones who go on a few dates with you because they want to get to know you better, and then they still say no. And then you go, what's going on? We were onto something, give us a chance. Or for me, these no's, these rejections of a business ask are really difficult to separate from a rejection on a personal level. It's, I want you to invest in me. Find the business, but if I'm the business, going back to identity, right? You're rejecting me, you're not rejecting the business, and that's hard.
Yeah. I was thinking exactly about self-worth, because I felt like the third party or second party, for me, the third party animal is like in some way determining our value on whether we are worthy or not of their attention and of their money. And I think that was a thought process we had to go through also with Nadim and Naeem, of like shaking it off after a call. I certainly feel like further ahead on the path, and after now we've probably had about 30 roughly conversations, like you feel much like there's much more ease. It still bugs me, especially where, you know, people are like pinching in you. Literally depends also on the personality who sits on the other side. But for instance, today we've had already two investors calls, and they were both really nice, and one especially where you really see, and this is my point, sort of connecting dots, also what we are trying to do with Future Farm and our latest investors group, that we've also do meet people where it comes across very visibly that they care about you as people. And so they ask us a lot to spend time on ourselves, although we do ask for money now, so we have to really go deep into the business. And it was just very human conversation. And I could see how Nadim was pitching this time, how he relaxed in his voice, and the whole experience is very different. So if you are an investor listening to this, please look at people as humans, because it is a dating also. This is both ways, right? So it is about finding the fit. It's not a one-way story. So yeah. Interesting. So this is where we are.
Yes.
I know we released recently episode with our friend Lucy about how we take care of our mental health as entrepreneurs, or you guys out there, if you are working for a company or part of the team. So do you want to share what stood out for you in the episode? Sure. Or where do you want to start?
I think for me, there's a couple of things, and I think we can be quite open about this. When we launched the Future Farm, remember, a few people from our corporate innovation world came to us and said, it's great that you're doing this for entrepreneurs, but what about us? What about the ones who work in the large corporations, but still have a slightly different approach, and therefore are exposed to similar challenges because we're building businesses within a corporate. And when we kind of, I met Lucy through, she's the wife of a friend of mine, and she posted this really insightful article because I knew that they'd gone through an experience in Dubai with COVID and really low mental health. So I thought it was interesting. And I thought we were going to talk more about the entrepreneurial challenges. But in the end, it was much more a story of somebody who has a very busy life, is a leader, has a responsibility, and at the same time struggles with a variety of different things. So the conversation moved a little bit away from the entrepreneurship, but moved very much to the very human conversation about what happens if you have a really busy job, a high profile job, you have a lot of responsibility, and suddenly you have something that throws you off because it was COVID. But that links back to some previous mental health challenges you've experienced all your life. And I found that that was a thing that attracted me to Lucy's story, was very much somebody who's actually thought about stuff, had an incident, and then took that as an opportunity to start digging deeper into the past and addressing things. But we had this in the conversation, but I also had the experience of hearing her husband talk to me as a friend about how he kind of experienced that. So it was a very different conversation from what we expected it to be originally, but I think it was still a very rich conversation because, yeah, Lucy was very good at talking about things that other people struggle to articulate.
Oh yeah. I mean, her level of ability to articulate her emotions and thoughts and reflections was really remarkable for me, especially for me. You know me, I'm like this raw Vladi English stuff. And she was just like, it was all making sense and so clear. But I hear you. In terms of like her story was, I know like we went back to the trauma topic number of times, and I know that I even pushed a little bit, which I reflected on afterwards. Like, what was it? Like, what was the trigger for me? And I think, frankly, it was coming from the place of, it was a mind thing. It was nothing to do with Lucy. It was that thing that when I sometimes feel like there is something in the past that people are speaking about the consequences and they're looking forward, which is also what you do a lot around in coaching. And then I sort of have this like trigger that takes me like, hey, but there in the past, there is the thing that is a root cause. And have you looked in there? And so I think it's something to just observe, and I'm looking out for, like, okay, sometimes I just have to be mindful to not take people there if they don't want to go there. But I think in this specific case with Lucy and the experience she had with her mom passing, to me somehow it became sort of evident, like how it started translating and impacting her being and decisions in later in life. You said that, you know, we did walk away from the entrepreneur and mental health, but however, honestly, and I thought about it today because I had a conversation with one of our team members here at NEEM, and we had our one-on-one and we were reflecting, and she actually opened up very, very vulnerably about her mental health struggles, and I think was beautiful. And it made me think that the way we arrived was that she was sort of ready for help. She has her own support system, and I asked about sort of therapy, and I realized this across not just this with one team member, but I crossed sort of my friends who are working in different teams and corporates, is that a lot of them are struggling to know where to look for help. Sorry, this was a long thought, but what I want to say, I lost myself somewhere in the middle of it. But basically my point is, it became very clear that looking for a therapist as a specific support mechanism is not easy. So I ended up in a number of conversations recently where it was like, I actually don't know with whom to talk about this and where to look for the right therapy, even if they're curious. And it just made me like empathize. And I was feeling like, you know, on Naked, we talk a lot about entrepreneurship entrepreneurs being special beasts, and it is true. But at the same time, I felt like in no way is it easier for people within the wider structures, very stigmatized. I'm sometimes even feeling that I, as an entrepreneur, like I feel empowered to have more voice and just be more edgy and ask for things and, like shoot things out there and be open about them. Then if I'm part of a mechanism, a part of a structure, and lots is expected of me. So that level of sort of empathy arrived to me after those conversations. So all that said, I think it's not easy. Lucy's episode triggered that in me, is that even people in big organizations and corporates, although there is this, there is a lot of buzz around well-being and wellness support systems right now for corporates, but I can clearly imagine like how for many it's a tick, and then in the actual authentic way for many people and employees is like, how do I do this? How do I talk about this? With whom? Like my manager might not be aware at all, etc., etc. It's a long list of thoughts. So that's all which came to me after re-listening to the episode.
And maybe it's also worth kind of mentioning that we're looking at that subject because we now know of a few organizations who are trying to help people in businesses.
Why don't we mention some of them? Could be useful, at least in the maybe spectrum of Europe that we know.
Sure, but they all have a different approach. I think what I wanted to say was the thing is that if you are an employee and your employer has an awareness, it could be coaching, it could be counseling access, it could be whatever it is. So there's the corporate bucket, and then there's organizations like our friend Adam has built in Slovakia, which is more like matching therapists with people who are looking for therapists as a platform. So I think it's also getting to the stage of figuring out what it is that you want or what it is that you need, right? So there's a step towards that. I think we can also I don't know why you mentioned specifically the European context, because most of the companies that I know are not in Europe. So for me,
well, I was thinking that UK is still part of Europe. That's why, because I was thinking our friends like Sanctus and other organizations in UK, and then our Slovak friends. But if you have in mind other people outside of this,
we'll put them in the blurb. We'll put them in the blurb.
Let's do that.
Because I also want us to spend more time digging deeper into that. There was a piece though when we talk about, let's call them kind of traditional employees. And then the entrepreneurs or the innovation people, and then the people who are building businesses on the outside. The reason I was quite intrigued by this particular profile of innovation focus, because that was my life for 10 years, right? Working with a lot of people who were set to do things differently, where their remit was to be different in an organization that doesn't give space for difference and doesn't understand that different profiles and different mindsets ultimately will cause friction.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who are in these roles who are being seen as the misfits or the viruses or all the people who use as labels to sound cool, it comes with a lot of additional struggles. So it's one thing to go and say, my manager doesn't get me, I don't really know who to talk to because I'm struggling with my coworkers or with the expectations or my career path. Is another one to have a large organization that sparks, that kind of allows this spark in people to emerge and say, look, you have these ideas and you have this extra skill set, go for it. And then they go for it. And with all the excitement and the emotional kind of energy that goes into, I'm allowed to do this, and this is a future, and I'm a change maker, and lots of stuff that our entrepreneur friends have. And then they hit that wall. That
I was thinking of glass ceiling. Immediately I saw it. Yeah.
And it's like, you're allowed to play, but still within the framework that we give you. We just make it look a little bit funkier. And the reason this was particularly intriguing, and this came through when we launched and all these people coming to us, was because people come, I've worked with so many innovation people who at some point had to make a choice. And the choice was, I have to leave the company because I've seen a different way of working and I cannot go back, which was ultimately a little bit my story, or they give up. But when we started working with innovation people in banking in 2011, 2012, there's not a single person who's still in an innovation role because people burn
It
out.
sounds like it's leading to a burnout. I was just about
Yeah.
to say, and Lucy said it on the show as well. She said that I was actually recovering from a burnout. I'm not sure what was triggering the burnout, but I can imagine it's related to what you were describing. I'm curious, like, was there any support system available to you at that time?
Oh,
Like,
absolutely not.
nothing.
Absolutely not. And bearing in mind that when I was at Swift, this was, or we were doing InnoTribe. So my innovation journey started at the end or mid 2011, and I did this for 2.5 years. That was mental health generally was not as much of a subject as it is now. And I'm pretty sure all organizations have that, the tick boxing exercises. No support, no awareness, nobody you can go and talk to. But for me, it was a very clear choice. I've discovered this new thing. The only way for me to develop that and live that is to go out and do it myself. And my
It led
team,
to a really good outcome at the end of the day.
Yes, that's
I mean, you gave. I mean, look, you gave some part of you and value to the organization. They gave you something, you took it and worked with it, and look, where you are today and what you created. Maybe that's, I'm thinking, I mean, maybe that's also part of that sort of journey or experience, being that outlier within, like what's the runway for those type of people within those big corporates? I mean, is it sustainable to stay there long term with exactly what you described? I feel like unless there is a buffer, like I'm visualizing a buffer that should be around that safe space created for those type of folks and this type of innovation and experimentation, everything, and support system. Otherwise it's like exactly like you said, like you're equipped, go to the war, but you don't have nearly like any weapons, you're naked and open for shoots and cuts and everything. I mean, it's it's like it feels quite raw and scary place to be at in some ways. So
So for me, corporate innovation is still one of those things I ultimately care about, but I find it really annoying. So I'm getting really annoyed by the way it's been done across industries. It's not just financial services. And the problem I have is that the people don't really bother trying to understand the needs of the people they need to do this. And therefore they equip them with certain things, very much what you say. There's some tools you get or a bit of freedom, but understanding that if you want to change the mindset of people, you need to also provide support for that mind change process, which is not necessarily just practical support, not necessarily just kind of a colorful room or a separate garage or whatever it is that looks cool, right? But you need to understand that it's also an emotional journey, and not everybody's ready for it. This whole it's interesting watching how people are now going back to work post-COVID. And all the companies have invested in creating these co-working environments and making it because they want to save space, right? Because not everybody will come back to the office. And then like my husband goes to the office and says that doesn't make sense because half the people are still at home. So we still have Zoom calls with half the team, but we no longer have a space where we can focus. Now we're sitting all in the same room on a Zoom call with the other half of the team, and it's noisy, and so there's little things that are very practical where people don't understand the toll it takes emotionally, from a motivational perspective, from a conflict resolution perspective, and all the other stuff. Sorry, you just pressed the button here because I think it's
no, but it's a beautiful topic, and maybe you gave us a nudge for sort of the next recordings, is that also discussing a little bit more like how the environment within which we operate and build our businesses, because now I'm coming back sort of to our nature of entrepreneurs and company builders. How does that impact our overall well-being? And I think it's a very rich topic, and now even more so with this friend of mine, he's sort of deep diving into this remote leadership, and how do you do that, and how does that impact your mental health? So why not let's make a note out there. And also, if you're listening and this is something that interests you, please do ping us. I mean, there's the the usual, the hello@thefuturefarm.co, and share your story with us. We'd love to hear from you. or if you're an expert, we can also have a beautiful conversation. I wanted to switch a gear a little bit here.
Go for it.
For today. There was a piece where I'm looking on my notes here, where Lucy said this one thing after her mom died. She was with her dad, and she said something like, when my dad fell apart, I couldn't fall apart. And I know it was such a small sort of piece of the whole conversation, but it sort of stuck with me. And I wanted to talk to you about this because it reminded me how I coped in a similar situation where my mom was also, her health was not well. And my father is a sort of a strong authority at home. And he's pretty emotional, but still, like, you know, he doesn't cry, let's say. I've seen him probably twice. And one thing is exactly at the moment where my mom was at the hospital for a long time, and he was providing a lot of support to her emotionally. And then he called me one day. I remember I was in a cottage in the middle of Slovakia, and I picked up the phone, and he was telling me that he's really bad, and he was crying. He was walking somewhere in the forest, and I remember myself, like, he was telling me about my mom, and my dad was crying, and I was like, dad called. I was like, well, I was pragmatic, let's put it that way. I was operational. Like, immediately I kicked in my execution mindset, my execution Vladi, and I was like, I was holding the space for him. And now I think you and I have talked about this in the past. I'm not sure. I don't think on the podcast, but she brought that back to me. And I think this one experience with my mom made me reflect on a wider sense, like, what's my coping mechanisms in those moments of crisis, where usually, let's say, there is another person who you would expect to, or it takes care of some of these things, but that person is not available, or is fell apart. Like, how do you cope with it? Like, I learned, and that reminded me also our conversation with Selma about postpartum depression, where she was saying her mindset was she was just executional, operational, like her coping mechanism. So I was curious, like, how you operate in those type of moments, and also just to frankly share that it's not something I'm trying to solve for naturally, or that I'm backed by, but it's just more of an observation. So I wanted to pose that question out to you and to the people out there, like, what's your coping mechanisms in the moments of crisis where other people around you need you to show up?
Wow, that's for a whole episode, Vladi.
I guess so.
There's a couple of things you mentioned, because the question, what's your coping mechanism, also depends on the context. But if it's the people you normally rely on, that's a very different framing, right? When my mom was diagnosed with depression, I was 12, and I was a teenager, and I was doing teenager stuff in the sense of also being confused and maybe not really playing up. And my dad was struggling to cope with 3 kids and a mom who was hospitalized on and off. And the only way he could get us to behave was by telling us, be good, because if you're not good, mom's not good. So at the age of 12, I was put all this responsibility on my mom's well-being on my shoulders. At least that's how I heard it, right? And he had no idea what he was doing. He had no idea that he was doing damage by doing that, right? So, but there was something there, not much later, where I started seeing that he was completely helpless in coping with it. So he did what he could. And there's no blame on him. But there was this, so mom's ill and dad's not coping. So the only thing I can do is just get on with stuff. So the operational bit, even as an early quite young person, was very much like, you just need to take care of a lot of things yourself. And being an immigrant child with parents who didn't really engage with the German society, I already had to do this administratively. So I was the one who would go to the authorities for everything. So I just took over some of the parenting responsibilities, which are taking care of certain things that I could. And that's even now. I mean, for me, the interesting thing in what you're describing is, so
Yeah.
if there is a crisis situation, I'm learning that it's not always my responsibility to solve for it.
I was just about to ask you, because the natural question following is like, how does it show up today in your relationships? You know?
Yeah,
Seriously.
thank you, my bloody therapist. No, it's true. So what you're saying is, and it's kind of funny because I also picked up on that when Lucy mentioned this, because we've seen this in other scenarios as well, right? There is something that's happening that is somewhat traumatic or kind of decisive, and then people's path is being shaped somewhat by that moment, right?
Yeah.
It's been a moment in one's life that decides a little bit a different direction. It steers you somewhere else, and then you might have to learn to undo certain things. My biggest problem in my personal relationships, in my kind of romantic relationships, is that I needed to learn that if my partner doesn't communicate with me for whatever reason, that they might have their own reasons, and it's not necessarily my responsibility to go, let's figure this out.
Yeah, solve for it.
Yeah. So yeah, operational, yes, but not necessarily, it doesn't have to come from me. But then look, my first job was I worked in an IT help desk. And when there was a crisis because something broke down and suddenly all the phones started ringing, I got a real buzz out of it. I was really,
You
there
got
was
the
this,
adrenaline hit.
yeah,
See
totally.
this. Yeah.
Totally. Because I was equipped to help and I could stay cool because when other people were going crazy, because I had all this training, you know, all this coping, and seriously, there was this genuine thrill.
And I see how this can be very useful, and because also there is a reward coming of acknowledgement and everything, right? And I'm thinking like, okay, this is not necessarily a bad thing. This can be very useful. I just think that you're right around like trying to understand where it's becoming harmful. Like, where is the boundary where I'm not, when it's not serving me anymore, right? And I'm not serving the others either. Or what's my motivation, at least, to serve them? Anyhow, I'm very therapeutic because I'm also going to therapy in an hour. So it's and that's for another episode. Yeah.
I can add one more facet to tie to your dad, because my dad was probably a bit more expressive with his feelings, but having had that kind of very important moment when I was 12 and still struggling with that. And then when my mom started getting really sick towards the end of her life, there was also a lot of tension between my mom and my dad. And that was because they were so intertwined that she wouldn't give him any space. And there was this one conversation where we were sitting outside my parents' house in Greece in his little park, where he opened up to me and practically tell me that he's struggling to cope with my mom's expectations. So this was my dad in his early 80s talking to me like an adult, but in a way also acknowledging that the road he'd put on my shoulders way earlier finally is actually tapping into that. And I felt seen, and I felt like it's the first time my father actually talks to me as an adult, as a proper adult, and as a peer of sorts, or maybe even somebody who knows better how to deal with things. And it was it felt like something's coming around full circle, and it felt healing. It felt really healing. And it's still, when my dad died, and I was talking to my therapist about this, I did say that it didn't feel like he left with unfinished business between us.
No, it's beautiful.
Yeah. So that was.
Yeah, it made me think like this is cliche, but Nadine says it, so it's not my cliche, it's Nadine's cliche. That life is built from individual moments, and I think these moments seems to stand out sort of massively. So, thank you, Nektarios. It was a lovely conversation today, and you all stay well out there. Fight your fights, or don't fight at all. Just be and take care of yourself.
Bye, everybody.
See you soon. Ciao.
Bye.